Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be going through my June wrap-up. So I'm a couple of days late, but I spent the end of June out of town visiting family. And so I'm now just able to get around to filming this wrap-up. But I will start off by saying that June was a really good reading month. I was reading a lot of things that I really enjoyed, a lot of really great books this month, and I'm very excited to talk about them. If you remember my June TBR, I had jokingly called it the Not Like Other TBRs because I had a bunch of books on there that I felt like didn't really get a lot of airtime on BookTube. And so I was hoping that June was going to be a month where I could talk about some of those books. I did not get to all of those books on the TBR, and there are some bigger books that did wheedle their way on here, but there are still some books that I feel like don't get talked about a whole lot that I can talk about. And the books that I read that are more popular, I really liked. So I'm not unhappy that I got around to reading those, but I'm just going to do this going through my book journal as I usually do and just read through them in order. I didn't count up all of my star ratings for the month, so I'll just quickly skim through. And I read 8 books in June. Some of them were pretty chunky, so that's why the number was a little bit lower. But of those books, I read 1 3-star book, 2 3.5-star books, 2 4-star books, 2 4.5-star books, and 1 5-star book. So a lot of books that I really loved, like I said, and I'm excited to talk about them. I will start off, like I said, I'll go chronologically. So I started off this month out of town, and I ended this month out of town. So apparently I was traveling a lot in June, but I started this month at a conference with some of my friends. And so I was doing a little bit more light reading while I was there because there was a lot of like hanging out and then some work things and just reading in between. And my very first selection was a graphic novel that I got from the Pride Month display at my local library. And that was a graphic novel called Bloom, which was a really sweet story. So this is, I think it's a little bit older. I can't quite remember the publication date, but I feel like it has to be at least like 5 years old because I've heard about it for quite some time. And it follows the story of a young boy who works in his parents' bakery. So he's a teenager. I think he's like just arriving at the end of high school and is about to go out and decide what he wants to do with his life. And his parents want him to take over the bakery. They want him to work there. And he is really rebelling against that. He wants to be a musician. He wants to move out to the city to perform with his band. And so he's trying to find someone to work at his parents' bakery for the summer so that he can go off and do the things that he wants to do. And they hire a boy who's visiting, who's just there for the summer, who has kind of had to get away from his own life for various reasons. And they form a friendship, which then blooms into something more. And it's a really sweet story. But it also tackles a lot of really relevant coming of age issues that don't often come up in these books. Some of the pricklier parts of coming of age. So things like fighting with your parents, fighting with your friends, trying to find out who you are, and not always in a way that feels entirely wholesome, in a way that really exemplifies the pain and the struggle of those moments of your life, those transition moments, I guess, that bring you from being, the person that you were to the person that you're going to be. And so it can be really hard to follow along these characters sometimes because they make really bad choices. And as someone who is a parent now, looking back, I feel like the lens that I'm using to examine this story is so different from the main character because I'm just like, oh, be nice to your parents. Like, can't you see that they care about you? But there is a lot of that really legitimate teenage struggle that's going on. And I thought that it was very well done for a graphic novel, which has a page limitation. This is a single volume graphic novel. I feel like the author really got to explore some of those deeper issues, and in the end, it was a genuinely heartwarming story. I thought that it was very cute. It was sometimes frustrating to look at these teenagers and see how they treated each other and how they treated other people and wondering if those things might ever change. But overall, I really enjoyed it, and that was one of the 3.5-star reads for the month. After that, I got into the buddy read for the channel of the month, and that was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. So I, along with everyone else on BookTube who had not yet read Legends and Lattes, read this in June. And it was just as wholesome and satisfying as everybody had made it out to be. I know the people who had put it on my radar in particular had been Patrick and Andrew and Joanna, who all really enjoyed it, and I will now join the ranks. This was one of my 4.5-star books, and I really, really liked it. I was worried, I'm not gonna lie, because books like House on the Cerulean Sea, which everybody loves because they're so heartwarming and wholesome, are sometimes a little bit too sweet for me. I find myself being like, this is a tiny bit too much. This is a little bit too cutesy for me. But I thought that Legends and Lattes balanced things really well. So it is a very wholesome and heartwarming fantasy story. But there is an undercurrent of mystery, there is some tension, there is some backstory that might be that the character is struggling with that's a little bit darker, and it just really worked for me. I think part of it was that it was not trying to be funny, which is something that I also really struggle with in these like wholesome and cutesy stories. If someone's sense of humor doesn't land with me, then I'll have a really hard time enjoying the book, which I think was part of the trouble with House in the Cerulean Sea. But Legends and Lattes does not try to be funny. It does not try to be fluffy. It just tries to be like, it's more slice of life than anything. It is just a little slice of the main character's life as she moves to a new place, tries to establish a new business, meets new friends, forges new connections, and it was really enjoyable. All the characters were really fun. There is an animal, I don't call it an animal companion, but it is a companion. There is an animal who kind of steals the show, and it was just as nice as everybody said it was going to be. I was really happy to have read it, and I think that I will probably reread it in the future. I will probably even get a paper copy. I read this one by Kindle, and I think I will get a hard copy of this one, a physical copy, so that I can reread it during times when I'm feeling a little bit slumpy. But very happy that I got to Legends and Lattes. And it seemed like everybody who read it on the Discord really liked it. I think there were a couple people who thought it was okay, but nobody who disliked it. I think that this is you can be pretty confident in recommending this to people, because I think it is a book that nearly everybody will enjoy. The third book of the month, and this is the one that is definitely more like popular fantasy, is that I finally read The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb. And I need to record a review for this. I have so many thoughts about The Mad Ship. And it's not that I haven't wanted to record a review. I am going to be recording a spoiler-filled review. It's just that I haven't had time yet. But I will say that I really loved it. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I did not love it as much as Ship of Magic. I think I prefer Ship of Magic to The Mad Ship. And it's just, it's personal preference. I think that if you enjoyed Ship of Magic, you will also love The Mad Ship. I just like the beginnings of things. I like finding out people. I like origin stories. I like figuring out who people are and piecing those clues together. This was definitely a middle book. It does not lag. It is not fruitless in its plot or anything like that. But it is a continuation of all the people's stories they're all culminating to some final event. So it does serve its purpose in that way as the middle part of a trilogy. And so I just liked it slightly less than Ship of Magic. I still loved it. I still think that the characters are phenomenal. There were some excellent character arcs in this book. There were some characters that I loathed. And I thought that I hated people in book one. But what I'm learning every time I read something new by Robin Hobb is that there is no limit to how much I can absolutely detest a character. She will, when I think that I have reached like the pinnacle of hatred, she will be like, Sarah, please, you haven't even started. And it'll be true, because there were so many moments in The Mad Ship when I was infuriated, and I'm super excited to talk about that. So if you're interested in Robin Hobb, then there will be a spoiler-filled review of The Mad Ship. But for anybody who's just thinking of going on to Live Ship Traders, I will say that this continues to be a very strong trilogy. The character work is unparalleled, and I am really looking forward to figuring out or finding out or seeing what happens in the final volume of this trilogy. Next up, the fourth book of the month was another one that I took from my library's display. So this is why I didn't get around to all of the books on my TBR, is that I went to the library with my kids so they could get some books for themselves, and they had a big like Pride Month display, and I took a bunch of books off that, and then I ended up reading those. But this was a substitute for my nonfiction of the month, and this was a book called, I want to make sure I get it right, We Have Always Been Here. So this was a memoir by a queer female Muslim, and it was so good. It was so vibrant. I picked up the book. First of all, the cover really caught my eye, which is why I wanted to read it. And so I pulled my eye on the display, and then I thought, well, this would be a really good nonfiction to read for Pride Month. So I just subbed it out with the nonfiction that I thought I was going to read this month. And the moment that I opened up like the first page and read the first 3 pages, I knew that I was really going to enjoy it because the author's voice was so strong, so vibrant, so moving that I knew it was going to be easy to fly through. I think I read it, like I sat down twice and read the whole thing. It was very, very easy to read, but it basically just chronicles her experiences in life, her own internalized homophobia, the environment that she was raised in, how she discovered and came to terms with her sexuality, and then how she, so the author of this book is also an artist and she's a photographer, and how she used her art to connect with other people within the same community and find those connections with other queer Muslims. And it was just, it's a really, really powerful book. I loved it. I had not heard of this author before. Many people may have, because some of her photography projects have been quite large and have reached a wide number of people, but I'm really glad that I read it. I would love to read more work by her. I found it to be a really moving selection, and it was perfect for my nonfiction of the month this month. Really glad that the bold colors of the cover drew me in so that I could pick this up when I saw it on display at the library. So yay for librarians for getting good books into people's hands always. Number 5, so my 5th book of the month was one that was on my TBR, and that is Marjorie Liu's The Tangle Palace. So this was another cover buy, incidentally. This was one that I saw at the bookstore last month or the month before, and decided that I was going to pick it up and put it on the June TBR. It has like a very beautiful but spooky kind of cover, and I think the only thing that had been written on the back was that this was dark feminist fantasy, and I was like, well, I'm there for it. Sign me up for your dark feminist fantasy. I think there were like maybe 6, 7, or 8 short stories. This is a pretty short book. It's only 250-ish pages. So the stories aren't overly long, but there just wasn't a lot of room for a lot of them. And I will say that most of them, they definitely had a feminist bend to them. A lot of them had a lot of great queer representation, and they were very creepy. So I haven't read anything else by Marjorie Liu. I know she has the Monstrous graphic novel series that's really popular. But reading The Tangle Palace made me want to pick up more of her work. I know she has some paranormal romance series, and then of course she has her graphic novel series. So I will definitely be picking up more by her. I liked all of the stories in this volume. Overall, I gave the volume 4 stars. And it's really hard to talk about collections of science fiction and fantasy because you need to know what people are going in expecting. So I would say that this is less cerebral than some of the really popular sci-fi fantasy short story collections. For example, the author's name is completely evading me right now. The author who wrote Stories of My Life. I will pop it up because it's not Ken Liu. It's another science fiction fantasy author. Regardless, his short story collections, Ted Chiang. Oh my gosh. I have read his short story collections, and like I said, they feel much more cerebral and enjoyable in a totally different way. Marjorie Liu's short story collection felt creepy and atmospheric and adventurous. Like they were more of your standard fantasy fare with a really spooky bend. For example, there's a voodoo type story with like revenge magic. There is artificially enhanced superhero stories. There's a lot of stories about haunted woods. I don't know what Marjorie Liu was going through when she was writing these stories, but there were a lot of like haunted, creepy forests that were integrated into these stories. But I really enjoyed all of them. I was totally immersed when I read each and every one of them. And like I said, it made me want to read more of her work. So if you're looking for a short story collection to read, then I would recommend this one, especially as the fall comes closer. I know people plan their TBRs a couple of months in advance. So if you're looking for something to read in October and you want to have some more female fantasy authors on your list, then I would definitely suggest adding this collection of short stories in for October. Totally gets my recommendation. After that was a book that I finished with my daughter, Juliet, and that is the second book in a middle grade series called The Strange Worlds Travel Agency, and this one was called At the Edge of the Ocean. So this series is essentially about a young girl named Felicity who goes by Flick, and she meets a young man named Jonathan who is the proprietor of a magical travel agency. And this travel agency, the way that it's set up is there are a bunch of tunnels into other worlds. So it's sort of like a portal fantasy. And within each suitcase that's housed at this travel agency, there exists another world. And they can jump through these suitcases and into other worlds. So the premise of this book is that they receive a missive from a pirate queen who says that her world is breaking down and she needs their help to try to find a way either to save it or to transport them to a new place of residence. So they go and explore this world and get embroiled in this mystery and try to help the pirate queen. And I really liked it. I have a couple of qualms with this series overall, with my main problem being that the two main characters have a really big age gap. So we have Flick, who is our main protagonist, and she's a 12-year-old girl, and then Jonathan, who is the head of the travel agency, who is an 18-year-old man. And even though he comes off as very boyish in this story, he is a man. He's 18 years old. He is an adult, under the law. And so it's a bit of a weird dynamic. Like, there is absolutely zero romance. I would not read it to my daughter if there was a romance between a 12-year-old girl and an 18-year-old man. But it's even... It does not bother her because, like I said, the 18-year-old character is written a lot younger than 18. But reading it as an adult, some of their friendship trials and some of the difficulties and some of the struggles that they have seem very imbalanced. Like when he gets upset with her or when they argue about certain things, I'm like, you should not really be arguing with a child about this. So it's like a bit of a weird dynamic for me personally, but she really loves them. So if you have someone who is at middle grade reading age, I think that these are really imaginative. They're really fun. And I enjoyed this second book even more than I enjoyed the first one. So I do still recommend them, and Juliet loves them. She is counting down the days to when book 3 is released in September. But just go in knowing that there is a bit of a wonky dynamic there. My 7th book of the month was one that was also on my TBR, and that is The Splinter King by Mike Brooks. So this is the second book in an epic fantasy series called The God King Chronicles. I read book 1 last year, and I think I gave book 1 maybe 3.5 stars. I also gave this one 3.5 stars, but I think I liked it a little bit more than book 1. This is a really interesting fantasy series. If you are fascinated by or interested in societal interactions. So it's difficult, especially because this is a second book in a series, to explain the overarching plot. But essentially, there is a group of people who, this is in book 1, who are not at war, but they're often raided by another group of people. And at the beginning of that story, these raiders arrive and they arrive at the kingdom and everybody thinks there's going to be a big fight. But what they're really doing is trying to seek sanctuary. And so the majority of book 1 is about that developing societal relationship where people who have been classically viewed as enemies are being enfolded into their society. They're trying to find ways to relate to one another, to join their two peoples, and a lot of the tension that is in the book comes from that relationship. That continues into book 2, so we have to still see them trying to struggle through that relationship. And we also get a variety of point of views that take us across the entire world. So not just the country that these two kind of main groups of people are in, not just that continent, but literally along the whole world. And so we're following a bunch of different threads. We have the thread of rumors that a god has come back to life. We follow a royal family who are descended from that same god, who are trying to hold on to their power. We follow some street urchins who are tied into that intrigue and that drama in a very tangential way. And then, of course, we follow those two main peoples who are the subjects of this god king, and as they are still trying to form and develop their ongoing relationship. So it's a lot. There are a lot of point of views, and I do struggle a little bit. I'm not sure that the balance is hit perfectly in terms of being equally invested in all of the storylines, which is something that I struggle with a little bit in multi-perspective stories. In any case, it's very difficult to balance so many POVs. Not everybody is a George R.R. Martin. Not everyone can make you care equally for all perspectives in such an expansive story. And this does have the same kind of scope or range as Game of Thrones, meaning that it takes place across an entire continent. There are different groups of people who may or may not have anything to do with one another. You're trying to follow threads of intrigue and how they might all intersect. And I don't think that Mike Brooks does a bad job of this. It just is not my preferred way of telling a fantasy story. I would rather have a more intimate look at fewer characters than that kind of big, expansive world. But the world building is really good here. There's a lot of really interesting things that he does with characters, with sexuality, with gender that you don't see in a lot of fantasy stories. So if that's something that means a lot to you or the kind of representation that you're looking for, then I would absolutely recommend picking up this series. And I will say that the further along I read in it, the more invested I am in figuring out what ultimately happens. I will definitely continue the series. I'm looking forward to book 3 that comes out later this year, and I will try to pick it up and read it close to its release date. And then hopefully we'll be able to give some opinions on the trilogy as a whole. But I did enjoy reading it. I actually listened to this one on audio, so I did enjoy listening to this one. And like I said, I'm looking forward to the final book in the series. The very last book I read of June was also my 5-star read of the month and my favorite read of the month, and that is Lord of the Silver Bow by David Gemmell. So this is the first book in his Troy trilogy, and I loved it. I read it on Discord with a couple of friends, one of whom had read it before, someone who was reading it for the first time, and we all loved it. It is, first of all, the book that I am now going to try to throw at Alan. Nobody else recommend this to Alan because I don't want him to think that it's too popular, so nobody else talk about it, please. But I will throw it at him every opportunity I get because I think it's so good. It is compulsively readable, so the pacing is fantastic. It is about 500 pages, but it reads like a much shorter novel. It takes characters that you know very well from the Iliad and from just Greek mythology in general, like Priam and Hector and Andromache, and it paints them in a totally different light. Like, these are angles of these characters that I hadn't considered or hadn't heard a lot about before. So compelling. The action scenes are great. I had known that from reading other works by David Gemmell, but action is still top notch here. And this really was him at the peak of his craft. This was the last series that he ever got to write before his unfortunate passing. And you can tell that he had really hit his stride as a fantasy author. I am so excited to read the rest of this trilogy. I believe it will become an all-time favorite if the quality maintains. And I'm just really looking forward to it. So if you're looking for some epic, it's not even really fantasy. It's probably more like epic historical fiction, but I believe there might be some more fantastic elements. Like, it's fantasy adjacent. If we want to call it historical fantasy or historical fiction or fantasy, I don't care what you call it, just read it. It was so good. I loved it. Kyle loved it. Colton loved it. Mike already loved it. He's the one who got us to read it. And I'm really happy that I decided to throw it in last minute on the TBR because I am really looking forward to reading the rest of that trilogy now. And that's it. Those are all of the books that I finished in the month of June. Sorry, I don't know what's up with Pippin. I have 2 books that I need to keep reading, so I'm partway through 2 books, and that is Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation Volume 2, which I should finish up in the next couple of days, and Vector Prime. So I need to finish Vector Prime so that I can go on to book 2 in the New Jedi Order, and then obviously I'll be able to chat about those in my July wrap-up. But I'm sorry this is a couple of days late. I would still really love to know what you all read in the month of June, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye!